a choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a rock.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expanding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Welcome to Expanding Reality. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. On this episode, guys, Jake Loco from Loco Listens Podcast comes by and hangs out, and we talk Dante's Inferno. Now, it's an awesome allegory. This is a wonderful breakdown on it, and Jake is just a badass. So you guys are absolutely going to love him in this conversation. So all the ways to find Jake and his awesome podcast, his link tree is linked below, so you guys definitely investigate him more, and we will have him back on. We only skim the surface here, which is wonderful. There's so much more to talk about. So before we get to that, guys, check out the resource links located below. You have, of course, Food Forest Abundance. Get that freedom from fear on. Libsyn, if you'd like to start your own podcast. Highly encourage everybody to do it. That link will give you 2 months free. Also, if you're going to feed the beast that is Amazon, buy anything at all, run it through our link. It's the same thing as Amazon. It just helps the show. That's the only damn difference. That's it. Also down there, guys, is going to be OPUS, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. Check that out for sure. They are a phenomenal resource. And lastly here, we have expandingrealitypodcast.com. That's going to be links to all the socials, merchandise. It will also get you to Rokfin. We play all the lives there, all the Too Hot for YouTube stuff. Check out also all of the collaborations I've done, meaning all of the panel shows or anybody that's invited me on to their wonderful show to be a guest. All of it is linked over there, guys. So definitely check that out. Also become an Expansive Insider. That's a great way to support the show. And I'm grateful for everybody that signed up for that. It's such a cool crew. So thanks again, guys. All right, so let's get to this incredible conversation with Jake Loco. All right, everybody out there hanging out, we have Jake Loco on from Loco Listens Podcast. Dude, you are a badass. You're new to the scene. You're young and fresh and out here just mixing it up, and we love seeing that. But you're badass, so it makes sense. You really are kicking ass just in the first few shows of yours that I've heard and a few other guest spots that you've done with some friends of ours. So very grateful to have you on and grateful to get into this topic, man. We have not covered this before, so I'm super excited. And you're the guy to talk to about this. So before we get launched into it, Jake, just tell us a little bit about you, man.
Hey, thank you, Brandon. It's good to be here with you, and I appreciate all those kind words. I didn't really plan on starting a podcast originally. I was just going to put out little videos and kind of promote my favorite podcasters. And then one day I decided, you know what? I haven't really been too creative in a while. Making those videos was kind of my dive back into my creative side after being on a hiatus, you could say. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to give it a shot. And now I've got 4 episodes out. And it's been great, but this is something I'm just doing for fun. I work full time as a high school English teacher. So the topic that we're going to cover today is actually very relevant because it's kind of what I do for work, but this is a great way to have fun and capitalize on those skills that make me happy and that I practice every day. So I'm excited to talk some books, some Dante's Inferno with you today, but I just wanted to ask you really quick, have you read Dante's Inferno before?
I have years ago, and I actually found my copy. I just didn't drag it out here in front of you. But yes, years and years ago, man. And so like we were talking about earlier, I'm not going to be a great immediate memory reference point for this, but there were definitely so many themes in it that I want to talk to you about. And the allegory of it, sticks with me. So you'll help us fill in the details. And I'm very excited to get your take on this because Dante's Inferno is an incredible allegory. And that's what we're going to go over. So where would you like to begin with that?
I guess we should begin with our personal connection to this story because you and I were both introduced to this book back in school, right? And it was something that the teacher brought up. And my initial reaction was, wow, well, this is kind of dumb. Like I wasn't really into spirituality at that time. And it seemed like propaganda. It seemed like a book that was like, this is supposed to make you become a better Christian. This is to put the fear of God into people. So, it didn't really vibe with me very much. But recently, this book was offered for free at the high school that I currently work at. They just have random free books giving away at certain times. So picked it up and I was like, oh yeah, I remember, not giving a shit about this book back in college. So let me take a second look. And I'm glad that whoever inspired me to take that second look, whether it was just seeing the cover or just thinking back to those old memories, I was like, you know what, this is going to be interesting. And God, I'm glad that I did, because there have been a lot of synchronicities happening around this book in my own personal life. And just the fact that it's such an allegory, like you said, is really cool. So you and I can really dive into how we personally relate to these 9 circles of hell that Dante descends into. What about you?
Hell yeah. No, absolutely. And I actually didn't hear about it in school. I just got it when I was younger because I thought it was cool. Like, I just heard about it and I was like, oh, I got to check this out. And it's very interesting, man. And so the more I got into it, the more I started to really look at it like it's a cool story, but really it's all about transcending yourself, and it's about going into the depths of yourself. I mean, that's kind of how I perceived it, is that it's really these just different levels of you, and you have a guide that's already been there before, Virgil, of course, and that's the guy that kind of takes you through it and says, don't you remember, like, you've done all this stuff, and so it's kind of how we greet this place, and it's a journey. Not only it's framed as a journey into the afterlife, but in my mind, I really looked at it as kind of a way to approach the ways that you approach this life, because there are different levels that you hit here, and some of them can be pretty damn dark. It's also a good warning to kind of say, when you go, you spiral in either direction. You either spiral in the positive vibe direction, and it just gets exponentially more so. The same is true for the inverse, which would be what Dante's trip represented, in my mind.
Absolutely, man. It's definitely a spiral in both regards. Like you said, you could be spiraling downward and making decisions that kind of dig you further and further down into this pit that it's hard to climb out of. Or the opposite, you could make those healthy choices. You could commit to those behaviors that move you up, or you could build relationships that move you up too. And that's the whole process of this descent into the Inferno, and then finally the ascent back up to paradise, is centered around Dante's lover, Beatrice. And I want to start with that first synchronicity. I've said this a couple times before already, but it's so cool that I think it's worth sharing over and over again. It's the fact that my parents gave me the middle name B. I had a great grandmother named Beatrice, and I didn't realize this at the time when I first read Dante's Inferno. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of in my name here. Like, it's just the letter B for my middle name. So felt that connection, and I was reminded of this. I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. Like, it's just a minor synchronicity, but it got my attention. And then from that point on, I was led through the rest of the story with the same sort of eagerness. So just to lay it out in the beginning for everyone, especially if they've never heard of the story or if they don't really know much about it, Dante is someone we can all relate to, because basically he starts the Inferno, this journey from the Inferno to purgatory to paradise. He wakes up in the middle of a forest as if he's been on this bender for years. And he finally wakes up and realizes, like, shit, I gotta make some changes around here, or else, things aren't gonna go so well for me. And, there's a bunch of ways to interpret the beginning of the story, but really some people would say on a historical level, Dante was exiled. He was a victim of cancel culture. So he wasn't allowed back into Florence, Italy, where he used to live. And now he's all wandering by himself. But if you put all that aside, I'm sure we can all relate to one point in our lives when we felt isolated and we didn't know where to turn. So this is the literal crossroads that Dante has to figure out what to do with. And up until he meets Virgil, he has zero direction. And I'm sure you could probably relate to this, right? Like, there's points in our lives, those crossroad moments where there are so many options, there's so many places we could go, and it just seems overwhelming,
Yeah, absolutely. So what have you done in the past when you hit those moments for yourself?
I think one of the first moments that comes to mind in recent memory was back in 2021 when the Omicron variant began. And that was a spooky time because, I wasn't afraid of Omicron and all the stuff happening, but it was the fact that, I was going to get this weekly test because I refused to get vaccinated. And I was doing this every week. And, at a certain point I was like, all right, I'm going to do this for the rest of the school year and I'm going to accept it. And it sucked. I didn't want to do that, but it made me feel disempowered. And then there were things happening around Omicron where the line to get tested, this nice nose swab, was hours and hours. You had to wait for like 3 hours sitting in your car, just waiting and waiting. And eventually they would run out of tests. So I had to just turn around and go back home. And the rule at the school is basically like, if you don't get tested within a certain time, then you can't come in and you have to stay home and they won't pay you. So I was kind of like freaking out about this. I was so upset. I was disappointed, and there was a lot of anger, but most of all, Brandon, it was that feeling of disempowerment. Like, all right, I need to go in and make money, but I can't. And I could if I get this injection, but it's one thing stopping me, and I'm all stressed out about it. And I stopped enjoying teaching. And I'm sure my students noticed that. So I really had to talk to my friends, talk to my family, be like, look, this is what's happening. I know, blah, 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 you should get vaccinated, this and that. But I had to like open up to them basically. And that's kind of a function of Virgil in this story, is Dante's spirit guide. And if there's no connection, no communication with that spirit guide, then things can get kind of dicey, Like, have you ever had an experience where you feel like you've communicated with something beyond your physical form? Like, have you ever had that kind of experience before?
I mean, I'm not an experiencer in that way, that I know of, and I've said this several times, but I have had some really interesting, what I consider interactions on some pretty heroic doses of psychedelics. Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting that you bring up psychedelics too, because a lot of the visions and the trials that Dante goes through are very much like this death trip through a psychedelic realm, where Dante has to, that some people would refer to it in more simple terms like ego death, but Dante's intact this whole time. His ego is put together, but he's going through this chaotic, turbulent, scary realm that opens up parts of himself that he never knew existed. And the whole process of integrating those sources of pain, those pain points, and those bits of trauma collectively create Dante's character to be stronger at the end of this whole journey, which is the whole point of the hero's journey, right? Whether you're taking a heroic dose of like mushrooms or something and you come out on the other end and you're stronger, older, wiser, and more experienced. In Dante's case, he did something very similar to that, and it was all in preparation to become reunited with Beatrice, which is pretty symbolic, to reunite with your lover.
And this kind of had some interesting tones. Like, wouldn't Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland and stuff like that parodied kind of off of this? This was kind of the inspiration for those stories.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I believe it's Eric Weinstein started the podcast. I think he called it The Portal. And it's this whole notion that there's a threshold between this ordinary world and then this other world. So like Wonderland or going into Oz. And for Dante, and I'm really happy that you asked this too, because I was listening to you and Dave from Gen Z and Andy from the Deep Share podcast talk about the Box Saga.
Yeah.
Yes.
Badass. We've got to, and how this relates, and we'll talk about this off of this, but we'll probably invite you to come do an episode with us having to
that'd
do
be
with
awesome.
How this relates. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
And I'll just quickly say this for anyone who's curious, that the bottom layer of hell, that ninth circle, is full of ice. So that kind of got my ears buzzing. I was like, all right. It's like way, way down in the hollow earth, because that's what hell is in this. The Inferno is basically this hollow earth civilization that has 9 dimensions to it. And the lower you go, the more evil it becomes. But at the very bottom is full of ice. And it just reminded me of everything you guys were talking about. So yeah, in terms of a threshold like Wonderland or Oz, the Inferno is a lot like just going into the hollow earth. And at the way bottom, there's this threshold of ice. And beyond that ice is now the path up to purgatory and to paradise. So it's really interesting that the ice is the dividing line between this world and that world.
Yeah, it's got some flat earth-ish type of tones to it as well. That's pretty interesting. So let's keep going with the story, man. So how did get us from where Dante meets Virgil?
Right. So Beatrice is waiting in paradise for Dante. She might be dead. She might just be, in spirit form, whatever it might be. It doesn't really matter. The fact is that Beatrice sent Virgil to help Dante, because one of the main themes that I keep on noticing in the story is that no one can go through hell alone. In fact, there are many times that we can get into further where Dante is unable to pass through certain sections by himself. if it wasn't for Virgil, he would have been stuck in hell. And for all we could tell, he would have never made it out. So that's, the primary function of Virgil. Like when I asked you earlier about like a spirit experience, it's more about having an intuition, you could say. Like when you're looking at reality through, your ordinary 3D lens, the intuition can be forgotten sometimes. But my father always tells me, and it's his great advice, I think, that there's always a little voice that's trying to guide you, and that's Virgil, or it's Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio. It's like the conscience, that's some kind of energy guiding you towards where you're supposed to go and away from where you shouldn't go. Or it could be like the angel and the devil on your shoulder. You're being pulled in two different directions, and so that's Virgil's role is to guide Dante on the right direction as a father figure, you could say. He's a spiritual father figure for Dante.
Very cool. And yes, and to your metaphor about the angel and devil, whenever that's represented in anything in like movies and cartoons and shit, it's always the character's face on each the devil and the angel. So it's really just you. And this is another thing about Virgil and about spirit guides and intuition. At some high level, perhaps one of the ideas is that it's just you. You're all your spirit guides and your future selves, and they kind of communicate back with you. And even just looking at it that way is very, very interesting. But I like how Virgil is a physical representation of this. And so we kind of can come across these things in our lives and our paths as well. And they appear in many different forms. Angel numbers, just things that you are significant, a song that plays, a smell of your grandmother's perfume or something like that, Beatrice. And then you have these kind of signs and signals here that just speak to you, that are still considered like your spirit guides. And you have the intuition or the little voice in your head that says to follow it. I like your dad already, man. It sounds like a cool guy.
He's a good guy. Yeah. Shout out to Mr. Loco here. So,
shout out.
Well, we got when Dante's going through these circles, we're going to get into what are in these circles for sure. But I just want to emphasize this because I think everyone's going to like this too. When they do encounter demons or dark souls or whoever, it's not that Virgil is going to use violence to defeat these demons. It's that he's going to use language, because Virgil is a poet. So it's kind of like what we're doing here. We're using language for a positive purpose. We're trying to help people learn to reflect and to think about quote unquote shadow work, if they would like to use that phrase, which is a lot of what the story deals with. And one thing before we dive into the circles, one last thing too, is that because there are 9 circles and we know that the bottom 3 are the absolute worst, it's very distracting because I think everyone wants to learn about those deep, dark circles, but it's really the upper layers that are most important, I think, because these are sins or errors or whatever you want to call them that are more common, that more people go through, whereas the bottom layers are more about violence and treachery and betrayal. So I'd like to be optimistic and say those are kind of rare in most people, but the others, like overindulgence and gluttony and greed and things like that, they're much more common. So I think it's good to spend a little more time up there and thinking about how we fit into this puzzle.
Just going to go ahead and also point out how I appreciate that enlightened perspective. That's very, very smart, dude. So already get it going, bro. Nice job.
Thank you, Brandon. So what I want to do to start is ask you a quick question, because there's a very famous line. Well, it's not really a line, but there's a sign at the entrance of hell. And, we can dive into the Hollow Earth thing in a bit, but it's literally like they find this cave, right? And then on this cave wall, there's an inscription, and it says, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter." And that's the first message. Yeah, it's very ominous. But what do you think about that? Abandon all hope, ye who enter.
I think it means to abandon all expectation. So basically just abandon all of what you know, abandon all of stable reality, abandon your cognitive dissonance, because you're going to be thrown into a completely new world, and that's what's going to happen. And you have no real hope of controlling it. It's kind of like a psychedelic experience, to be honest with you. It's not even, abandon all hope is kind of a scary thing. It's kind of a warning, but it doesn't have to be interpreted that way, I don't think.
Exactly. It gave me goosebumps to hear you say that, because it's just like a psychedelic trip. If you're going to be handed like a cup of ayahuasca, it's like you shouldn't really try to control that experience. You should just be there for the ride and stay conscious. And I think that's exactly what it would be like, for sure. So I'm glad you said that. You definitely picked up on the theme that we're going for here. And so with that in mind, There are a couple scenarios where, so we're in, there's no way I could fit the whole story into one podcast. We're going to be like scratching the surface just so everyone knows. So I'm going to skip around. I'm going to try to go chronologically, but there are things I'm going to leave out. But I do want to start with that signage, abandon all hope, ye who enter. And there's something interesting that Virgil does to Dante. There's a quick image when Dante accepts the fact, like you said, you have to accept it. You can't try to control it or change it. You have to go through this experience, this dark night of the soul, and let it do what it's going to do to you and try to make the best of it, I guess. So Virgil is described as helping Dante open up like a flower. It's like, given where Dante began in the story, he was depressed, he was isolated, he was alone. He had nothing really. He had no wife, no job, nothing. Like he was just out there homeless in the forest. And once he starts interacting with Virgil, he starts to open up like a flower would that's finally getting sunlight. So I want you to keep that image in mind when he progresses further, because just because Dante can open up like that, it's just as easy for him to shut down and to try to go back to sleep, So one of the first obstacles that they find in their journey is in the circle of the lustful, the desirous, the carnal is what it's really called. And in this realm, and this is something I personally relate to, I don't think many people talk about this much, but I think it's worth mentioning. For me personally, when I think about the carnal and this circle of hell, I think about the fact that anyone who was particularly isolated during this pandemic nonsense probably at one point could have been vulnerable to things like pornography addiction or just an overindulgence in that type of energy. So Dante does a great job of describing what happens to these people caught in this literal storm. It's literally a storm, a tornado. These people are being thrown around. They have no control whatsoever. They're not grounded at all because they're so led astray by wild desires. There's no control whatsoever. And this is a common theme that relates to the animal and the human. And it's tough for people to learn how to integrate those two forces and become, a better human if you can, but you can't totally deny that animal side of you. So that's tough for Dante to come to terms with, because of course he's vulnerable just like anyone. He loves Beatrice. It's not like an innocent love. So everyone's could be corruptible in this way, but this is all about overindulgence. And so I really like this whirlwind imagery, because I know for me, if I went through stretches of, it's not going to sound nice. I can't make this sound sexy, but like being addicted to pornography and doing any of that kind of stuff is not helping someone stay stable, and their creative energy is split. So like if I wanted to make a podcast or, create a cool video, I couldn't do it because my energy is being dissipated this way and that way, just like being caught in a storm. I couldn't really stay grounded and stable.
Energy flows where the attention goes.
Attention goes where energy flows. Yes, sir. So one thing that I want to point out, when Dante sees this happening to these souls who he can relate to, he doesn't look down on them. He doesn't scorn them. He's like, wow, that could be me. And that's so important to think about that. There are points when Dante reaches the lower levels where he looks down on these souls and he's like, wow, shame on you. But this is not happening now, because Dante knows that he's just as guilty or vulnerable as any of these other people were. So this is so overwhelming for him that he passes out. He literally, it says he swoons. So he just can't absorb all this information and he just passes out. Like, what do you think about that? The fact that he loses consciousness?
It may be part of just the overwhelming nature of this experience. So he probably thought he would be so far removed from being even considered being part of this crew or anything beyond what Virgil was about to show him, excuse me, that he was just like, oh yeah, I got this. But it became so real and then so relatable. And then he saw himself there and so, yeah, overwhelmed. And this could also be part of the first little throes of your psychedelic experience. This could be you entering, another just way to interpret it, entering that state and then easing off into it and then waking up and you're still in that state, because that happens too sometimes. You fall asleep and you wake up still tripping balls. So,
and that's exactly what happens. The trip is far from over when Dante finally wakes up, because he wakes up and he basically is teleported or transported to the next section. So it's just like that. That's a really cool way to put it. Never heard that before. But after the carnal, and this, they all relate to each other. They all build off of each other. But after the carnal in this third circle is the gluttons. And what's interesting about gluttony is the fact that it doesn't have to be food, like you ever just like scroll through, like, I know you make a lot of videos and you do a great job doing that. And you probably have to spend a lot of time on the computer producing these clips and doing this kind of thing. And sometimes gluttony could take the form of consumption of media. Like, I know a lot of my students are probably really absorbed by things like TikTok, and it's not always going to be food, but gluttony is definitely related directly to food. And that's what most people would think about it. But do you ever find yourself, just kind of absorbed or almost possessed by this digital spirit that draws you in?
Not so much. I honestly have a very good handle on it, and I'm super grateful for my approach at this. I kind of had a few rules early on in life, like whenever I was out on my own doing my craziest stuff, no needle drugs. Okay, so that was like my thing, and I stuck to that, and I'm grateful for that. So that got me through a bunch of crazy shit. Like when my boundaries were very flexible, I at least had that one. And then another one would be this. So yeah, I'm right there with you, man.
Awesome. And there's a great lesson there because it's dependent on our discipline or the boundaries that we put up that can help us to avoid going off into the deep end. And I think if people lose that, if they are quote unquote degenerating and just losing their sense of morality, that could easily happen. So in terms of gluttony, I mean, it doesn't sound too bad because it's just eating a lot, but that harms not only you, but it can harm the people around you too. And if you've ever been around someone, or maybe, if you've been through this yourself, I certainly have, where I get lazy and I just want to eat all day and I don't really do much. And I'm not a really nice person to be around when that happens, but it's interesting to then go into the reverse of that. Like if you've ever tried like intermittent fasting, I started to notice that when my stomach was empty, I thought about more things than just food. I was able to think about so many other things and not worry about, satisfying that hunger or, satisfying the urge for flavor more than anything. And it's just really interesting to consider, like when you go through these circles of hell, like the opposite of being overindulgent in the carnal is having a more mature approach to relationships and sexuality. The opposite to gluttony, like you brought up, is having these systems in place, these disciplines, these boundaries, or these routines. And that's so crucial. And I'd love to dive into each of the rings of hell, like I just said, have their opposite. They have their lighter side, just like every zodiac sign has their shadow side, you could say. So I think it's something interesting that we should look at as we go through. But
100%. Turn your notifications off of everything. That's my best. That's where I started. Just turn your notifications off. For me, it wasn't about that I was on it too much. It was that I checked it too much because it told me to. And this was fucking years ago, by the way. I haven't done this in years. But I just turned all the notifications off. It got to a point because, again, your energy goes where your attention flows. And so if something's demanding my attention all the time, it took me out of cool moments that I was in. I'm like, hang on, why am I allowing this to do this? Why, and that was a wake up for me. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just turn all the notifications off. And eventually, if you send me a message, I'll get back to you eventually. I'll check it every now and then. But it definitely does not demand my attention. That's the first step. So I'm just going to offer that to everybody out there who's like, how do I even start with something like that? Turn your notifications off. Check it when you want to.
Solid advice. Absolutely. Yeah. Because your time, you can't get it back. And that's a great way to make sure that it's used in the way that you want it to and not the way that your phone wants it to. So there's a big difference there for sure. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Now, there's a very interesting point in the fourth circle. We're dealing with hoarders and wasters. So instead of gluttony, where you're consuming, hoarding and wasting could take many forms. So, one example is, I know there are people hoarding toilet paper throughout the 2020. It's kind of a funny one to just think about, that someone out there has like a whole pallet of toilet paper just waiting for some shitstorm. But it's
literally, I like the pun intended. Literally. Very nice, man.
Thank you.
We're not going to let that one slip by. Nice job, Jake.
Appreciate it, Brandon.
You're absolutely right. Someone is sitting there just, baby, I told you this is gold. And you're absolutely right on this. I think that's hilarious.
Here's the thing, though. I totally respect preppers, and I think they're intelligent for doing so. But is there a wrong way to prep? Like, what do you think? Like, how does someone become a hoarder versus a prepper? What's the difference?
Well, useful and sustainable versus nonsense. So toilet paper would be like one of those things. On a camping trip or something like that, there are many other options you have than just specifically toilet paper. Leaves, you've got, bidet type style stuff. If you're out in nature, you got water ball in hand and you can deal with it because it's nature, and we've, been conditioned to think things that we do naturally is disgusting. So there's kind of a more natural approach to this. And so any prepper will tell you, yeah, a little bit of toilet paper probably, but that's not going to be their first go-to to start storing. You're talking water, first of all, food, and then ammo probably. That's kind of the order of operations with that. Toilet paper's gets the shit end of the stick. I mean, you got many other options. That was like one of the things.
Good one there.
Yeah, well, and that was one of the things a lot of people were laughing about with that whole thing was it's like you can do so many other things. It's such an innocuous thing, but it had to do with attacking people's dignity. And I think that's what it was really all about. It was people feeling scared that their dignity would be robbed from them.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's like the whole toilet paper thing was like a psyop in and of itself because it brought people down to like their base fears of disgust or of like not being clean. Never thought about that before. It's very interesting.
And it's got to do with root chakra stuff too. I mean, if you really want to get down there with it, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it's like almost as if the circles of hell are like an inverted chakra system because you start with these root problems, whether it's like a sense of, we'll get into that as we go through, but I've never thought about that before, so it's cool. You're giving me some cool ideas here. So Brandon, another thing that we should talk about is besides the hoarders and the wasters. So hoarding is one thing. Wasting would just be like, all right, you can throw things away willy-nilly and not really use them. And that's, material objects. Yes, that happens a lot. People waste a lot. But I think another part of it that should be considered is being wasteful in relationships.
Yes.
And I feel like at some point we've all probably been taken for granted or someone has taken us for granted. And that could send someone into a downward spiral into hell. That's absolutely like when you feel like your time has been wasted or someone has wasted your time. It's a very difficult sentiment to deal with. And what happens next though, it's interesting because there is the hoarders and the wasters on one end, and they're arguing about material goods and, oh, you have too much of this, or, oh, you're using too much of this and whatever. They're arguing back and forth forever. But the other side of this section in the fifth circle is the Wrathful and the Sullen. And this is interesting because earlier we were talking about Dante. He's not necessarily harsh or judgmental up until this point. Once he reaches this point, he realizes like it's part of his experience, his learning experience is to be the judge. It's almost like Virgil is allowing him to bring his shadow out, because Dante, I'm sure if anyone is out there, walking around in public and just judging people and just be like, oh, look at those people, I'm so much better than those people. It's like, that's not really a good feeling. You don't want to do that, but that's what Dante's kind of pushed to do. So he starts to scorn these individuals that are referred to as the Wrathful and the Sullen. And to summarize this really quick, the Wrathful are anyone holding on to resentment. And that's a word that I hear people like Jordan Peterson use a lot. It's like people who are so hung up on something that happened in the past that they are just hanging on to it and they're angry about it. And they just want to punish the people responsible and they can't let it go. And it's not necessarily violent, but it's just that attitude that like, oh my God, just let that go, man. And to think about the reverse, it's being able to let those things go and relax and breathe and be like, all right, maybe someone did you dirty back in the past, but are you going to allow that to ruin the rest of your life? Or are you going to move on from it? And that's an important question that people got to ask themselves eventually.
Yeah, but the grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's the silliest thing in the world. Get over it, guys. Right. Just thank them for the lessons and move forward. Like sit with it, acknowledge it. It sucked. It played its part. Be grateful and move on. Right. Quit walking upstairs backwards, looking back. Walk forward. Look where you're going. You guys some folks spend a lot of time looking behind them. Just keep moving forward.
Exactly. So there's great lessons there. Reading this epic poem, it was originally, when I thought I was gonna dive into it and not enjoy it, it was because I thought this was gonna be like a depressing story. But when I was getting into it, I was like, wow, this is just a great opportunity to reflect on things that I've done in the past, and how I've grown from that point. So to build off of what you just said, the other group in this area are the Sullen. So they're more of the depressed side. They are not really they're still holding on in the same way that the Wrathful do, but they are shutting down because of that. They're not angry. And sometimes it's better to be angry. It's good to have a little bit of fuel to get you to do something, to get you to act. But if you're so depleted and you have you're just sullen, just like kind of becoming like a sloth, that's something you really want to avoid. And if anyone has gone through a stretch of time where they're sitting all day, they get into that sedentary lifestyle. I know it's very easy to fall into that trap, especially if you're working in like an office type of setting, but that has serious reverberations out into the future. Like, have you ever noticed when you move around, you can feel your energy moving around too? Like if you take a walk, if you're having an anxious thought building up in your chest, say, and you take a nice 5 or 10 minute walk, you'll let that energy move out. It won't get stuck. And that's what happens to these souls in hell, is they get stuck in this space, whereas Dante is moving through it. He's flowing in and out of these circles. He's not stuck in one particular area. He's just visiting. And it's cool what you're doing, Brandon, with this podcast, is that you get to interview all sorts of cool people. And that's what Dante's doing while he's traveling through hell. He doesn't just try to run through and get out of there. He's stopping to talk to these people, find out what happened to them. And I think there's another good lesson there, is that just because someone is making mistakes or living a life that is not something you would do, doesn't mean you can't learn from them. And I think it's a really good, humbling experience.
Perfectly put. Absolutely perfectly put. And I just kind of want to point out also to something that you said, that Dante is moving through it and he's not stuck. This is one of the things with the cyclical nature, the visual representation of what hell is here. It seems like some people can get caught in this, and you look at it like a cycle, right? Like it's a swirl. It's just a whirlpool in the river of life that's off to the side that some folks can get stuck in. And maybe you stay there for a little bit, learn what you need to learn, and move on. That's another good metaphor for what Dante's doing here. He's seeing these different levels, what they can teach him, speaking to the people, just like you said. You got to get amongst them to find out what's going on, and then not getting stuck in that cycle like they did in their life, which then translated to here. Then this physical representation of them getting stuck in it when they had the chance to get out of it in real life, and then moving through it that way, Dante, instead of just being stuck there. And so he gets some good insight with that on those cyclical type of conversations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just something that you reminded me of when you were talking about this, the fact that Dante talks to all these people and learns from them, reminds me a lot about what Jesus did. Like that story of Jesus talking to prostitutes and lepers and kind of the downcast section of society that other people didn't really want to talk to. They would kind of disassociate from those types of people. But Christ as a symbolic character was someone who was intimately familiar with that lower side, or that dark side of humanity that everyone else tried to ignore. So I think there's a very powerful lesson to be learned from Dante's journey, because no matter who you talk to, no matter where you are and whoever you find yourself interacting with, you can always learn something if you just open yourself up and talk to them. And that's what Virgil helps Dante see too, is that in times when Dante gets scared, like when there's certain creatures, like eventually they run into Medusa, who is terrifying because you can't even look at her. She'll turn you into stone. So it's like, you got to completely hide yourself away. You can't even interact with her directly. And there are many times in a case like that where Virgil encourages Dante to speak. And there's a very strong connection to language in this journey, where if Virgil encounters demons that won't let them pass, Virgil will negotiate with them. He'll speak with them and use language to figure out how to solve this issue. And I think that reminds me of the importance of a mindset. It's like what you said earlier, Brandon, was where attention goes, energy flows. And if you're running that negative thought cycle, it'll spiral and spiral and spiral. And all you got to do is inject one positive thought there, and that cycle can break, and then move in a different direction. And that's sometimes easier said than done, but I think it's a pretty nice reminder, you know?
I had a young lady, Kiera Lyfridge, on, and she said 2 words that whenever things kind of go tits up, don't spiral. And that, I mean, same with metaphor, everything you're talking about here, but those 2 words right there really keep you level from going apeshit or spiraling out into all these different scenarios that could maybe be possible, whatever. But really it's about taking your focus and your power back by just stepping back a little bit. Don't spiral. Couple of deep breaths, go out and take a walk. I love what you said about that. I completely agree. And even just breaking up the monotony of what you feel is misery. Do something completely different. Just take some time away from it. Even doing this gig, like I love my occupation. This is the most incredible thing I've ever done in my life, but I have to take breaks from this. You can't do this 100% of the time. Even though I spend 16 something hours on something like this a day, I still break it up with going outside and taking the dogs out for walks or going down to the pond for a little bit, and whatever. So it has to be broken up because, again, just like this, even too much of a good thing, back to glutton, is not good, even something that you love, because it will physically affect you. Like it affects the shows. If I edit for too long, you get what's called ear fatigue. This is just an audio engineer thing. You get ear fatigue and you'll think that you're helping things quite a bit, but you're really doing a lot of damage that you have to go back in and fix later on, when all you had to do is just take 5 minutes and take a break and let your ears rest. But you could do this with your psyche, with your depression, with your anxiety, with any of that stuff. Just take 5 minutes away from it. Give yourself 5 minutes, to take a break from what you feel. And just breathe. Do something different.
It's an awesome reminder. I mean, I assume that some people get tired of hearing about moderation, take a break. But like the thing is, though, that's such a crucial lesson that if we overlook, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Because like you said, you could be doing something good or something fun and still do too much of it. So I think it's solid advice there to take a break or take a breath. If anything, take a breath, and yeah.
I was somebody, and I still kind of consider myself this way, not too much lately, but even moderation was in moderation for me. I would moderate moderation. And so it was a very efficient type of a thing, but it wasn't good. It's like scheduling your sex. I mean, some people, that's important and all that, but it took kind of the fun out of it for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. We need a little bit of fun, every now and then. It's not like we can totally deny ourselves of what we would consider to be fun or pleasurable, and that's why it's uncomfortable for me to bring up like that earlier realm of the like pornography or masturbation, like those kinds of things. I'm not saying you should never have an orgasm again, but I'm saying like if you pay attention to what happens to you, if you choose not to, you might notice something interesting about your own energy, and you might think twice about having, say, a casual affair. That might not be the best thing for you. If you overindulge in something good, even if you really think it's good for you or it's going to help you or it's going to be enjoyable, try doing less of it and seeing what happens. I think it's again, just like hearing moderation. It's like people don't really like hearing that, I guess. But I think for me personally, I know it's a pretty good reminder to have.
100%. You got to take a break from the stuff you love, and then it makes when you come back to it even cooler. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the cool part about like zooming out and looking at the overall story here is that Dante has to go through hell to reach Beatrice again. So it's like there's a necessary separation, and this whole process is preparing him to become a better man so that when he does reunite with her, he'll be ready. He'll be his absolute best self. And I think it's also important because, we can go through every single circle and, I could definitely give you a lot more of the symbolism. Like we talked about Medusa. There's also the Minotaur who comes up at one point. This is more in the lower area where there's violence against neighbors. And the Minotaur, he's bull-headed. He's got a human torso. He's the epitome of that mix between the human and the animal, the human and the beast. And he's, it's hard to integrate those two forces. So the Minotaur is the guardian of this area where people are violent against their neighbors. And it's interesting to think about how Dante recognizes the Minotaur right away. It's like he's seeing in a trip almost his imagination of what this place would be like. And that's what I keep on jumping back to, is that this psychedelic trip or this dream state that he's in is a reflection of his own consciousness. So this is what hell looks like for Dante, but everyone else can have their own personal sort of cast of characters or archetypes, if you will, which is kind of interesting.
What's hell look like for you?
For me, excellent question. So for hell, I mean, I earlier brought up the whole like vaccine mandate thing, and it was hell for me because I stopped enjoying work. And I think that I've met so many people and I've heard so many stories about, the stereotypical, I was working this job that I hated. I left, I found something better, and now I'm way happier. The end. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna avoid that. I actually love teaching. Teaching in a public school kind of sucks sometimes because there's just a lot of bullshit. I'll just put it like that. But the bit of joy that you can get out of it is very valuable to me. And the fact that there was a barrier between my passion and my work. And once you take passion out of work, whether it's a podcast or you're teaching, or even if you're like some kind of artist and you're making something, you don't want to get distracted by other political bullshit, that I never wanted that to interfere with what I was doing. And I guess I just, I found out that I wasn't strong enough to not pay attention to any of that. And so that was hell for me. But more than that, more importantly, I think, that would be like an upper layer of hell. But the bottom layer for hell is knowing that I've hurt someone. And that's something I'm terrified of. So whether it's my students, I don't want to be too mean, or I don't want to like make someone cry just because I'm abusing my power as an authority figure. That's something I want to avoid totally. And I think it's good to ask ourselves what hell looks like, because it also brings up the opposite of, what does paradise look like? So, since we've been on here for almost an hour, I'd like to ask you, Brandon, what does paradise look like for you?
The ultimate freedom and non-judgment to just be your most true, authentic self. That's honestly what it looks like for me. And like super quick manifestation. Like you could just do whatever you want right away, kind of a thing.
Yeah. It's like anytime you have an idea or that creative spark, that inspiration, naturally those obstacles will pop up, whether those are mental blocks, like, I'm not good enough to do this, or, this is going to go wrong, so I should just avoid it. But having that ability to just quickly manifest without allowing those obstacles to possess your energy, which is something you brought up earlier. It's like you could let these things control you, or you could, overpower them. You could integrate those demons, and instead of them controlling you, instead of being the slave to the underworld, you could be, you could be the opposite. You could be the master of those darker forces and control them rather than being controlled by them.
That's right. That's what that shadow work integration is all about. Because yes, like you said earlier, completely agree. You don't want to abolish that damn thing. It's very important for you here. And it's like breaking a horse, a wild horse or something like that. It takes a while and you can get hurt and it's very scary. But once you integrate that, the teamwork that you two can accomplish is unbelievable. You move much faster and you get a lot more cool shit done. So integration of shadow work is something very important. So I'm grateful that you brought it up as well. That's a recurring thing that I really am enjoying that more people are pointing out along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it all goes back to that very first warning on the entrance to hell. It's like abandon all hope. You're not going to be able to turn around and go backwards. You have to finish it through. So no matter what, let's say you're stuck in this rut like I was a couple months ago, I was able to pull myself out. I was able to talk to my loved ones. If you have anyone to talk to, hit them up. Be like, hey, I'm going through shit right now. Let's talk about it. And you're going to feel better after that. I guarantee it. And the best thing is too, when you're reading Dante's Inferno, is there is a very, very timely theme here. So, Brandon, we're recording this on Thursday. Tomorrow is Good Friday. And I don't know if you were aware of this, but it's really cool. Dante goes through his journey and he begins on Good Friday and he reaches paradise on Easter Sunday. How symbolic is that?
Look at us. And we even rescheduled this. That's really cool.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I dig it.
Divine timing
I didn't even think of absolutely. Every time, by the way, I'm constantly reminded that is a thing. So it's just divine timing. I get, it's that I'm to the nonchalance part of it, which is actually the best place to be with it. It's not to where I'm not grateful when it occurs. It always blows my mind. It's always an awe type of a feeling, but it occurs so goddamn much that I'm just like, Yeah, I mean, of course, like I just not even expect it. It's just, yeah, sky's blue, whatever. Dope shit happens all the time. It's amazing. And that's that nonchalance place that Esther Hicks talks about whenever she says that's when you are in the vibration of your highest manifestation self, is when you're nonchalant about the things that you want to manifest. You're not like, about money or about love or whatever. You just, all right, if I get it, cool. If not, whatever. But dope shit happens. Yeah, cool. All right, that's amazing. And so it begets more dope shit. It's really cool. I mean, that spiral is one I definitely got on board with. I'm a big fan.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm so happy you brought up Esther Hicks too, like Abraham, that the whole philosophy of the abundance mindset, like these people, like let's say the gluttons or the hoarders, like they're living in that poverty mindset because they think, oh, if they don't have enough, then they're not going to be able to make it. And there's a possibility out there that we can all grasp that there's plenty and we can access it whenever we want. All we got to do is ask for it or reach out and take it. Respectfully, don't steal. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like everything that you want is available to you if you're willing to look forward and move towards it. And that's the greatest lesson I can take away from Dante, because the fact is, like, I love talking about Dante's Inferno, but I personally haven't read the other two books. So that would be Purgatory and Paradise. And I'm really looking forward to diving into that because, yes, like you should understand sin. And that's the whole idea of this first book, is becoming aware. It's the awakening process that begins this shadow work and this dark night of the soul. But you don't stay there forever. And that's kind of why Virgil's there too, because Dante, there's a big difference between visiting hell and staying there. And that's what Virgil prevents Dante from staying there for too long. And so it's good that we orient ourselves upward as well and think about, all right, now that we've visited hell, now that we've been there and we're familiar with what's down there, where are we going to go next? And the only place you can go is up. And I think it's a good opportunity to reflect, just like I asked you, like, how would you imagine paradise? Well, if you can live in freedom of judgment, or being able to be your true authentic self. I'm trying to paraphrase what you said, but it was awesome. It's like, that's we should always try to imagine what we want life to be like. And there's a big difference between that and focusing on what we don't like and what we don't want. And that can be distracting,
Now, what's great about this is that's a heaven that I exist in now. I do live in not fear of what anybody else thinks about me, and I don't have judgment against myself, and I'm my most authentic self 100% of the time. And that is the heaven that I've allowed myself to create here. That's like the best thing I can imagine. Now, the coolest thing is anything on top of that's an absolute bonus. So I still kind of leave the universe open to surprise me. I'm still a big fan of that. I don't want to have it all figured out. And another thing to what you said, the three books also are kind of mirror images of Dolores Cannon's idea of the 3D, the 4D, and the 5D, the fifth dimension, or Earth, or whatever. You have the 3D where it's hell, the Inferno, Purgatory where it's 4D, where you kind of figure everything out, but you don't know what to do with it, and you're just kind of like, this kind of sucks, but it's kind of awesome too. Like I have more awareness, but I don't know what to do with it. So you are in that purgatory state. And then paradise would be the fifth dimension, where you've gone through all that shit. You're like, okay, cool. And then you integrate and you just see opportunities and possibilities everywhere, rather than these horribles and, hurtfuls and all that kind of stuff.
I love that. Once again, this is the coolest part about talking about books. This is why I became a teacher in the first place, is the fact that, when you're thinking about Dolores Cannon, so in the 3D, in hell, you're becoming aware, you're learning what error and sin looks like. And then purgatory, that 4D section, that second part, is you're climbing a mountain of purgatory and you're actively letting go of these things that weighed you down and sent you down into that hell realm. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's like you're learning to integrate the shadow, renouncing the things that you need to renounce, or overcoming the obstacles that you need to overcome as you climb up this mountain. And then the destination, of course, is that fifth dimension, that paradise, where you can now enjoy what you've worked so hard to achieve. And I think this happens periodically and in a cyclical fashion. We're not going to stay in paradise forever either. You can't stay in any particular zone. We're going to be thrown about in all different directions, and it's up to us to remain oriented towards paradise, even if we're all the way down in hell. We're going to start over once you reach paradise, and you're going to have to climb back up. And it's important to remember that you'll never have to climb back up alone. There's always going to be that inner guide, that inner voice leading you through that darkness.
I love it. The Virgil element of this is something that takeaway is very cool because, yes, you think about this. You are never alone, which is great. Even when you want your privacy, that's fine. But you're never like alone. You might be alone, but you're not lonely. You know what I mean? So I like the correlation there. Another thing I was thinking about, too, this as well, is Dante had to take his trip the way that he took it because that's the way he needed to understand the lessons and then to be, with Beatrice and everything. But he had the opportunity to learn all of this stuff in Florence, but he got booted out of there because he fucked it up so much. So what's interesting is this place will kind of present lessons to you and you can integrate into a system here. But if you go against that system to a point to where, like you said, he was too cool for it, and nobody wanted him around, nobody wanted to put up with his bullshit. But really, it was just, he was his own deal. Now, what's interesting to this also is another correlation to this would be kind of like a Scared Straight. Maybe Scared Straight got their idea for their show off of the Inferno, because you take them into a horrible situation to interact with people who fucked up. You don't have to stay there, but you could end up there if you don't change your ways. So this is like the Scared Straight model where they take those poor kids in and,
Right.
Another correlation would be Idiocracy. That's another metaphor
awesome
for this.
Movie.
Yeah, and it parallels this idea pretty closely. It's interesting.
Yeah. Speaking of the pop culture references, there's one that it doesn't directly relate to Dante's Inferno, but it has that same theme that you're just speaking of. It's this comes up in multiple sources, but there's a life review. So like, let's say someone has a near-death experience and then they're taken by this like Virgil figure or the Grim Reaper. So let's look at your highlight reel of your life. Where have you been? Who have you interacted with? And what have you done? And that's the most important question, is what have you done? And then they go through this whole life review. It's over at the end and they have a chance to go back and make a better choice. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. And that always makes me think back to, it's not his idea, but it's something that Jordan Peterson would talk about a lot. I don't know if you can tell, but he influenced me a lot back in like 2018. Yeah. For the better too. He would talk about hell is not a place that you go, but it's a place that you create. And I think it's definitely circles back to everything we've been discussing today, is the fact that if you want to create paradise, then you can, but you're also capable of creating hell. And the connection I can make to my current classroom is that we're learning about the Holocaust. So whether it's Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, or Elie Wiesel in Night, it's the fact that if you allow nihilism to take over, then you're not going to survive. And if you want to survive, you have to find a way to create meaning, no matter what's happening to you. You could be going through the worst shit ever, but if you can find a way to make life meaningful, find something to look forward to, or find a reason to survive at the very least, then you'll reach paradise eventually if you just hang on. And that's sometimes the message people need, because life can weigh down on you pretty heavily. But this story really opened my eyes to the fact that, we've all been down there. We've all spent time down there, but no one stays there forever. And that's the most important thing. This too shall pass.
Dude, you're a sweetheart and a badass. Now I get why everybody loves you, because I'm on the Jake train too. So Jake Loco, all the ways to find you will be located down in the show notes. I can't thank you enough. We're definitely going to have you back in, because we didn't even touch the Inner Earth thing. Me and you are going to talk about this in Inner Earth. Thank you so much for your time, dude. We'll definitely have you back, brother. You killed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking some more. We've only barely scratched the surface, but we'll spend more time talking about paradise next time. I'm going to study up. But thank you again for having me on. You guys can find me at Loco Listens on Instagram, and if you type in on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, Loco Listens Podcast. I got 4 episodes up. Should have a 5th out sometime tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to having many conversations. The whole idea is that if you have some kind of truth that you want to talk about, then I will listen to you. Loco will listen. And so thank you for indulging me tonight, Brandon. And I appreciate the reflective discussion we've been able to have here. And I'm looking forward to doing some more of this. This is going to be great.
Discussions are a direct reflection of the guest. So great job, my friend. Thank you so much for this, man. All the ways, of course, to find you. You have a great link tree, so I'm going to throw all that down in the show notes. Guys, check the show notes for sure. Check Jake out. Follow him around. He's kicking ass. It's just, you're crushing it, man. Again, keep moving forward, dude. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Love it. Expanding reality is great, man. Great to be here. Cheers.
Want to send a huge shout out to Jake for coming by and hanging out. One of the coolest dudes ever, and we have so much more to talk about, so he will be back. Make sure that you guys check out the show notes located down there and find all the ways to connect with Jake. He is awesome. Definitely check out his amazing show, Loco Listens Podcast. And thank you again, Jake. Just such a badass, man. I appreciate you. So check out our resource links, of course, guys. Food Forest Abundance, Get That Freedom from Fear on Libsyn. If you'd like to start your own podcast, highly encourage everybody that has the calling, go ahead and pull the trigger on that. Amazon, if you were going to feed that beast at all, run it through our link. It helps the show. Also down there is OPUS, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. Make sure that you check them out as well. A phenomenal resource. And lastly, down there, guys, expandingrealitypodcast.com. That is a way to expand your experience on all kinds of cool stuff that we do here. Lives are replayed there, too hot for YouTube. Check out all the collaborations. Become an expansive insider. That's a wonderful way to support the show. Also, merchandise and all that good stuff, guys. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for everything. So go out into this incredible place, guys, and you know what I'm going to say. Pick up a piece of litter. Be nice to everybody that you come across. Open some doors. Something small like buying a coffee or a meal or something like that for somebody in line around you goes a long, long way, and it's just an awesome way to raise the vibe for you personally and the entire collective. The ripple effects from that are truly, truly remarkable. So also, while you guys are out there doing the damn thing, get out of the left-hand lane. It's such a pain in the ass. You got somebody behind you wanting to pass there. And of course, y'all know what I'm going to say. Go out into this beautiful place, whatever the hell it is, and y'all just be good to one another. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and we will see you next time.